There is hardly a person today who has not heard at least something about the Bermuda Triangle, about mysterious catastrophes at sea and in the sky, about mass disappearances of people, and many other things. Most scientists are skeptical of the phenomenon, but enthusiasts already count several dozen strange and unexplained disasters within the Bermuda Triangle and insist that it cannot be a simple accident. And so, I have selected for you the 5 most famous intriguing tragedies of the Bermuda Triangle. Of all the mysteries associated with the Bermuda Triangle, none is perhaps stranger than the disappearance of Flight 19, a group of planes that disappeared just after the end of World War II during routine training exercises. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon of December 5, 1945, 5 torpedo bombers flew out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Each plane had been carefully prepared for the training flight. There were 3 men aboard each of them. At the beginning, Flight 19 was headed strictly on course. For a while, everything seemed to be going well. But after 2 hours of flight time, the Fort Lauderdale operator began to receive an alarming message from the team leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor. In a voice full of bewilderment, Lieutenant Taylor reported that his instruments had gone crazy, and not only his, but the instruments on the other planes were also out of order. "Where are you?" asked the radio operator. Taylor couldn't answer. "It's all wrong here," shouted the commander. "We've lost our way. Even the sea isn't the same." Alarmed by Taylor's messages, the operator continued to ask about their coordinates, but with each passing minute the commander's voice grew more distant and deafening. Interference appeared, and the messages became more and more meaningless. His last words were something along the lines of, "Don't follow us, for God's sake." A search was organized, but the rescuers themselves became victims of a strange triangle. When the searched plane entered the area where Flight 19 was supposed to be, it suddenly disappeared from the radar screens. The official version is that the team leader panicked and the aircraft simply crashed into the sea. And the plane, sent on the search, exploded for unknown reasons. Why Lieutenant Taylor did not follow the course to the coast of Florida if the visibility was good? Why, in spite of all the searches undertaken, no remains of the planes or corpses of the dead pilots could be found? What made Taylor and his men break radio contact so suddenly? To this day, the mystery of Flight 19's disappearance remains unsolved. On October 22, 1944, the U.S. Navy discovered a ship adrift off the coast of Florida. The only living creature on one of them was a dog. This ship was called the Rubicon. Naval Coast Guard cutters radioed that the ship was in excellent condition. The ship's log was never able to find any indication that shed light on the fate of the crew. The last entry was dated September 26, about a month before the discovery. The entry stated that the Rubicon was entering the harbor that day. A torn, thick ship's rope, normally used to moor a ship, was hanging from the bow of the ship. The personal belongings and crew members were in their places. The dog left on the ship behaved in a friendly manner. But where had the crew themselves gone? A few days later, the renowned New York Times published an article suggesting that when a hurricane struck the harbor, the Rubicon's crew had rushed ashore and abandoned the dog in their haste to get ashore. Soon the mooring ropes broke and the ship was carried out onto the high seas. But not a single crew member was found on shore, even though the ship had more than 300 people on board, according to newspaper reports. There were no lifeboats on the ship. It was assumed that the dinghies had broken away during the storm, but here's the strange thing. First, in those days in the area where the Rubicon disappeared, there were no such strong sea waves recorded. Secondly, they transmitted an SOS signal by radio from the ship, although it had a radio transmitter. Where did the Rubicon crew disappear to? If they fled from the ship, then what prompted the crew of as many as 300 people to leave the ship in a hurry? No most thorough search in the waters of the Bermuda Triangle explained the reasons for such a mass disappearance of people. And the case of the ghost ship Rubicon is still one of the most mysterious and unexplained in the history of the Bermuda Triangle. Before I continue this video, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Here's the deal. These are the statistics of those who watch me and are my subscribers. Not great, right? Please subscribe so you don't miss new and interesting videos coming out. Thank you. And we're on. One of the most mysterious Bermuda Triangle stories of the 20th century was the disappearance of a U.S. support ship called the Cyclops. On March 4, 1918, this masterpiece of engineering, 500 feet long and displacing 19,500 tons, sailed from Barbados and the Caribbean Sea to Norfolk. But the Cyclops, with a crew of 309 and a valuable cargo of manganese ore, disappeared without a trace, despite the searches undertaken. There was no trace of the missing ship. The Cyclops did not even send out an SOS. Initially, everyone thought it had been blown up by a German mine or destroyed by a submarine. The First World War was going on, but after analyzing the German military archive, it turned out that there were no mines on the German military submarines on the ship's route. Besides, in case of a mine explosion or torpedoing, the radio operator had time to send an SOS signal, and there should have been at least some wreckage left. Moreover, the day the ship disappeared, the weather was fine, the sea was rough, and the wind was weak. All this eliminates the assumption of a shipwreck during the storm. The only clue to the Cyclops mystery may be the testimony of Navy diver Dean Haves. 50 years after the disappearance of the Cyclops, during another dive in the ocean, Haves suddenly came across a sunken ship. At the time, he was very surprised by the strange shape of the ship, but before he could begin his investigations, Haves was forced to rise to the surface, and soon a strong wind carried his boat a long distance from the site of the discovery. When Haves was later shown a photograph of the Cyclops, he had no doubt that it was the ship that lay at the bottom. Except that communication with the Cyclops was lost on March 4, 1918, and the ship could not reach that area until March 10. Despite subsequent searches, the Cyclops was never found, and the real reason for its disappearance remains a mystery. On a cold January morning, the five-masted schooner Charles Deering was found on Diamond Shoals Shoal with her sails raised. A pot of hot food was still smoking on the stove in the galley, but not a single living soul was aboard, save for two cats. None of the schooner's crew could be found. That is how an article in a local newspaper began in January 1921. And now more details. In September 1920, the brand new schooner Carl Deering sailed to South America. The schooner made it safely all the way to South America and back, but something strange happened near the Diamond Shoals of the Carl Deering. The vessel, under all sails without a single damage and with a large supply of food, ran aground near Cape Hatteras. All 12 men of the crew, with the captain in the lead, disappeared overnight. It appears that the schooner was abandoned in a hurry. Something unknown had happened just before the crew was about to sit down to dinner. The first thought was that the schooner had been hijacked by pirates and taken all the crew hostage, but why would the pirates need lifeboats which were not on the ship? And it is hard to believe that in those days pirates could be operating in the territorial waters of the United States. Moreover, no trace of the pirates was ever found later. Another version, that the crew, suddenly caught in the storm, tried to board the lifeboats in panic, and all the men died. This, too, did not seem a convincing version. The schooner was perfectly intact, and there was no such severe weather in those parts at that time. The mystery of the disappearance of the crew of the Carl Deering caused such a resonance that U.S. Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover personally ordered an investigation. But no new leads were ever found in the case, and at the end of 1922, the investigation was closed without a formal conclusion. On May 21, 1968, around midnight, the nuclear submarine Scorpion transmitted a routine report of its location to its base in Norfolk. It was the last radio contact with a submarine over 3,000 tons of displacement. This mighty submarine, considered virtually invulnerable, simply disappeared overnight. Most curiously, no distress signals were received from the vessel this time either. When the Scorpion did not return to Norfolk by the estimated time of arrival, an entire expedition was sent out in search of the submarine. But the hot pursuit was inconclusive. A month later, in June of the same year, Newsweek magazine published information that underwater sound recorders had allegedly recorded the explosion of a submarine hull. In October, the U.S. Defense Department said a research vessel had photographed part of the submarine hull more than 3 kilometers below the ocean floor at the alleged crash site. However, it is hardly possible to raise any wreckage to the surface. The Board of Inquiry decided to investigate further, and a year later the commission reported that it could never explain the loss of the Scorpion, and there was no damage to it at all. And if there had been a leak on the submarine, the Defense Department assures us, a perfectly trained crew would have fixed it quickly, and certainly would have signaled distress. And the case of the submarine Scorpion is still one of the most mysterious and unexplained in the history of the Bermuda Triangle. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and write what you think about it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to me.